The first sign that something was wrong came in the form of a declined card. It was a Tuesday morning in early December, the kind of gray winter morning that makes everything feel quieter than it should. I was standing at a bakery near my office in Evanston, Illinois, holding a paper cup of coffee and a bagel I hadn't even taken a bite of yet. Nothing fancy. $5 and change. The cashier swiped my card once. Then again. "I'm sorry," she said, already reaching for the receipt printer. "It's saying insufficient funds." For a second, I thought she must have mixed me up with someone else.
"That can't be right," I said, keeping my voice calm.
"Could you try again?" She did. Same result. I handed her another card, my backup. Same message. I felt heat creep up my neck. The familiar embarrassment of being watched by strangers who suddenly had opinions about you. I mumbled an apology, left the coffee on the counter, and walked outside into the cold. I didn't panic. Not yet. I'm 31 years old. My name is Natalie Rowe. I work as a senior project coordinator for a mid-sized healthcare consulting firm downtown. I pay my bills on time. I don't live beyond my means. I don't bounce checks. I pulled up my banking app while standing on the sidewalk. The screen loaded slowly, which felt ominous all by itself. Then the numbers appeared. My checking account balance was $214.37. Yesterday, it had been just over $18,000. I stared at the screen, waiting for it to correct itself. Refresh. Close the app. Open it again. The number didn't change. I scrolled down. There it was. A single transaction, dated the night before at 11:48 p.m. Internal transfer. Authorized user. Amount: $17,650. My stomach tightened. Authorized user. I already knew who that was. My mother. I stood there longer than I should have, my fingers numb, the noise of traffic fading into the background. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't crying. I was doing math. That money wasn't random. It wasn't spending money. It was my wedding fund. I was supposed to get married in 6 months, or at least, I thought I was. I drove to work on autopilot, barely remembering the turns. I sat through the morning meeting, nodded at timelines, answered emails, and smiled when my manager joked about holiday burnout. No one noticed anything was wrong. That's the thing about being the reliable one. People don't look too closely. At lunch, I called the bank. After the usual hold music and scripted apologies, a man with a steady voice explained what I already suspected. The transfer was made by an authorized user on the account, he said. Everything appears to be in order. I didn't approve it, I said. There's no requirement for secondary approval, he replied. Your mother has full access. I thanked him and hung up. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. Because somewhere deep down, I wasn't surprised. My parents, Diane and Harold Rowe, had been financially involved in my life for longer than I cared to admit. When I was 23 and fresh out of grad school, my mother insisted on being added to my account just in case. She framed it as support, safety, love. You never know when something could happen, she'd said, and families should look out for each other. At the time, it felt comforting. Over the years, I forgot she was even there. She never touched the account, never asked about balances, never crossed a line. Until now, I texted her. Did you move money from my account? The reply came almost immediately. Yes, we needed it temporarily. Don't panic. Temporarily. For what? 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Your sister's wedding deposit. The venue needed the full amount by this morning. We'll sort it out later. My sister. Of course it was my sister. Emily is 27. Younger. Softer. The one everyone worries about. The one whose mistakes are always treated as learning experiences, never consequences. Her wedding was in 4 months. Mine was in 6. I stared at the screen, my chest tight, but my mind oddly clear. You took my wedding money, I typed, without asking me. It's family, Natalie, my mother replied. This isn't a competition. I didn't answer. Instead, I opened my calendar and canceled my afternoon meetings. Then I drove straight to my parents' house. They live in a large colonial in Wilmette, the kind of house that smells like polished wood and old assumptions. My mother answered the door like she'd been expecting me. She smiled, wide and practiced. "You look tired," she said. "Are you eating enough?" I walked past her into the living room. "Where is the money?" I asked. She closed the door behind me, her smile tightening just slightly. "It's being used responsibly," she said. Emily was panicking. The venue threatened to cancel. We couldn't let that happen. "That was my money," I said. My father looked up from his chair. "You'll get married later in the year. What's the rush?" The words landed harder than they should have. "I told you my date," I said. My mother waved her hand. "Dates can be moved. Deposits can be adjusted. Emily is fragile right now." There it was. Fragile. I stood there, in the house I grew up in, and felt something shift. This wasn't about money. This was about priority. "You didn't ask me," I said quietly. My mother crossed her arms. "We didn't need to." My father nodded. "We're just managing things fairly." Fairly. I looked at both of them. Really looked. They weren't apologetic. They weren't nervous. They were confident, because they believed I would swallow it. Like I always had. I turned toward the door. "Where are you going?" my mother asked. "To make sure this never happens again," I said. She laughed. A short, dismissive sound. "Don't be dramatic, Natalie." I paused with my hand on the handle. "I'm not," I said. "I'm done being convenient." As I stepped outside into the cold, my phone buzzed. A text from Emily. "Mom said you're upset. I didn't know she'd take it from you. But it's already paid. I hope you understand." I didn't respond, because in that moment, standing alone in my parents' driveway, I realized something that would change everything. I hadn't just lost money. I'd lost the illusion that love and control were different things. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. I didn't go home after leaving my parents' house. I drove without direction, letting familiar streets blur together until I ended up parked along Sheridan Road, the lake on my right, gray and restless under the winter sky. I turned off the engine and sat there, hands resting loosely on the steering wheel, breathing slowly. Shock isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It settles in quietly and starts reorganizing your thoughts without asking. $17,650. I replayed the number in my head, not because I needed to remember it, but because my mind was trying to understand what it represented now. That wasn't just my wedding fund. It was a year of saying no, of skipping vacations, of choosing practical shoes over pretty ones, of telling myself later, while watching other people celebrate milestones, I was postponing. I opened my phone again and scrolled through old messages from my mother. Little comments I'd brushed off at the time now looked different. "You're so responsible, Natalie. You don't really need help, do you? Emily just needs a little more support than you ever did." Support. Responsibility. Fragile. The words stacked neatly into a pattern I'd never wanted to see. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Mark, my fiancé. "Hey, are you okay? You left work early. Everything all right?" I stared at his name longer than necessary. Mark and I had been together 3 years. He was steady, kind, the sort of man who believed problems could be solved by talking them through calmly at the kitchen table. He loved my family, trusted them, especially my parents. I typed, deleted, typed again. "Can we talk later tonight?" Something came up. "Sure," he replied. "Love you." I closed my eyes. I loved him too. But I already knew this situation wouldn't land softly. Eventually, I drove home. My apartment felt different the moment I walked in, like a place I was borrowing rather than inhabiting. I set my purse down, kicked off my shoes, and sat on the edge of the couch without turning on the lights. That evening, my parents didn't call. Neither did Emily. The silence stretched, thick and deliberate. Around 7, Mark arrived with takeout and concern written all over his face. He sat beside me, handed me a container of noodles, and waited. I told him everything. Not dramatically, not with tears, just facts. The joint account, the transfer, Emily's venue, my parents' response. He listened quietly, his jaw tightening the longer I spoke. "They can't do that," he said finally. "They already did," I replied. "But it's your money," he said. "They didn't even ask?" I shook my head. "That's not normal, Natalie," he said. "That's controlling." I looked at him. "Thank you," I said. He frowned slightly. "For what?" "For saying that out loud," I said. "Everyone else keeps calling it help." He wrapped an arm around me, and for a moment I let myself lean into it. But even then my mind was moving ahead, already mapping out what this meant. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "I don't know yet," I said honestly. "But I'm not pretending it's fine." The next morning, I woke up to 3 missed calls, all from my mother. I listened to the voicemails while brushing my teeth. "Natalie, this is getting blown out of proportion. Your father and I are very hurt by your reaction. You need to call us back so we can calm this down." Calm this down. I deleted them. At work, I couldn't focus. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because I felt like I was watching my life from a step outside it. Every interaction felt slightly distant, like I was observing rather than participating. Around noon, Emily finally texted, "I didn't want to upset you. I swear I thought Mom had talked to you. The venue needed the money or they'd cancel. I didn't have a choice." I read it twice. Then, once more. "You always have a choice," I typed back. "You just didn't include me in it." She didn't reply. That afternoon, I called the bank again. Not customer service, the branch manager. I explained the situation calmly. The joint account, the unauthorized transfer. She listened carefully, then said something that stuck with me. "Legally, your mother acted within her rights," she said. "But that doesn't mean you don't have options." "What options?" I asked. "You can remove yourself from the account," she said. "Open a new one in your name only. And you can document everything." Document. That word clicked. When I hung up, I opened a new folder on my laptop. I titled it simply, Finances. Inside, I started saving screenshots, bank statements, transaction histories, emails. I wasn't angry while I did it. I was methodical. That night, my parents showed up, unannounced. I didn't invite them in right away. I stood in the doorway, arms crossed, blocking the view of my living room. "This is unnecessary," my mother said. "We should talk like adults." "We are talking like adults," I said. "You just don't like what I'm saying." My father sighed. "Natalie, you're overreacting. We raised you better than this." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "You raised me to be quiet," I said. "There's a difference." My mother's eyes narrowed. "You're being dramatic." "No," I replied. "I'm being specific." I stepped aside and let them in. They sat on my couch, close together, united. I stayed standing. "When are you putting the money back?" I asked. My mother exchanged a glance with my father. "That's complicated," she said. "How?" I asked. "The venue deposit is non-refundable," she said, "and Emily doesn't have it to return." "So you decided I could afford the loss," I said. My father leaned forward. "You're stronger than she is." There it was again. Strength as justification. "I want it in writing," I said. They both froze. "In writing?" my mother repeated. "Yes," I said. "How much was taken? When it will be returned? An acknowledgement that it was my money." My mother laughed. "Why would we do that?" I met her eyes. "Because if you don't, this becomes something else." My father stood abruptly. "Are you threatening us?" "No," I said. "I'm informing you." They left, angry. That night, Mark asked me if I was okay. "I am," I said. "I just finally understand where I stand." He squeezed my hand. But even as I lay in bed later, staring at the ceiling, I felt a quiet certainty forming. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This was a system. And systems don't fix themselves. They have to be dismantled. The first thing I did the next morning was take a personal day. I didn't call my mother back. I didn't answer Emily. I emailed my manager something vague about a family matter and shut my laptop before anyone could ask questions. I needed quiet. Not emotional quiet, strategic quiet. I sat at my dining table with a notebook, my phone, and my laptop. The same table where Mark and I had sketched out wedding ideas only a week earlier, laughing over seating charts and arguing gently about whether we needed a live band. That version of reality already felt distant. I started by listing facts. Account opened 8 years ago. Authorized user added, my mother, Diane Rowe. Reason given, emergency access. Funds transferred, $17,650. Date and time, December 4th, 11:48 p.m. Purpose claimed, Emily's wedding venue deposit. Facts don't argue back. They don't gaslight you. They sit there and wait. I logged into my bank account again, this time through the desktop site, and pulled full statements going back 2 years. Not just balances, transaction histories. What I saw made my stomach tighten. There were smaller transfers I hadn't noticed before. Nothing dramatic. A few hundred here, 1,000 there. Always labeled temporary. always repaid weeks later. At least, most of them had been. There was one from last spring for $3,200 that had never been returned. I stared at the screen. That had been right around the time Emily lost her job. I remembered my mother calling me, voice full of concern, asking if I thought Emily would be okay. I'd said yes. Of course I had. I hadn't checked my account. Why would I? By noon, I had a spreadsheet. Dates, amounts, notes. This wasn't a single incident. It was a pattern. And patterns imply intention. That afternoon, I called a lawyer. I didn't know what kind I needed, so I started with a general practice firm in downtown Chicago that specialized in family and financial disputes. The woman who answered the phone spoke calmly, asked a few questions, then scheduled me for a consultation the next morning. Her name was Laura Bennett. That night, Mark came over again. He watched me organize documents without interrupting. "You're really doing this," he said finally. "Yes," I replied. He hesitated. "Do you think they know you're serious?" I looked up at him. "They've never had to find out." He nodded slowly. "I'll support you," he said. "But I need to ask something." I waited. "If this gets ugly," he said carefully, "are you ready for what that might mean? With your family, with the wedding?" The word wedding hung between us. I thought of the money, the silence, the certainty in my parents' voices. "I'm more afraid of what happens if I don't," I said. The next morning, I sat across from Laura Bennett in a small conference room that smelled faintly of coffee and old books. She was in her early 40s, sharp-eyed, no nonsense. She listened without interrupting as I explained everything. When I finished, she leaned back slightly. "You're not dealing with a misunderstanding," she said. "You're dealing with misuse of authority." "Is it illegal?" I asked. She considered her words carefully. "Legally," she said, "your mother had access, but access does not mean unlimited discretion, especially when funds are used for purposes that clearly disadvantage the primary account holder." "What does that mean in real terms?" I asked. "It means," she said, "that you have leverage, particularly if there's evidence of a pattern." I slid my spreadsheet across the table. She studied it. "This is good," she said. "This is very good." I didn't feel proud. I felt steady. "What would you recommend?" I asked. "First," she said, "you remove yourself from that account immediately. Open a new one in your name only. Second, you stop discussing this verbally with your parents, everything in writing. Third, we send a formal letter requesting repayment and documentation." "And if they refuse?" I asked. "Then we escalate," she said simply. I left her office with a folder under my arm and a strange sense of clarity. That afternoon, I went to the bank. I closed the joint account. The teller looked surprised. "Are you sure?" "Yes," I said. I opened a new account on the spot. My name only. No authorized users, no exceptions. When I transferred what little money remained, it felt symbolic, like locking a door that had been open for too long. That evening, my mother called again. I didn't answer. Instead, I emailed her. "Mom, I've closed the joint account and opened a new one in my name only. I'm requesting written confirmation of the amount taken from my account, the purpose, and a repayment plan. Please respond by Friday. Natalie." Her reply came within minutes. "This is unnecessary and hurtful. Why are you doing this to us?" I stared at the screen. I typed back, "I'm not doing anything to you. I'm responding to what was done to me." There was no reply. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. The next day, Emily showed up at my apartment. She looked smaller than usual. Her coat hung awkwardly on her frame. Her eyes were red, but I didn't know if that was from crying or the cold. "I didn't know it was this serious," she said as soon as I opened the door. I didn't invite her in right away. "Did you know Mom took the money from my account?" I asked. She hesitated. She said it was easier that way. "Did you ask me?" I asked. "No," she admitted. "Then you knew," I said. She flinched. "I didn't think you'd say no," she said quietly. That hurt more than anything else so far. "So you decided I didn't get a choice," I said. She started crying then, really crying. And for a split second, the old reflex kicked in, the urge to comfort, to smooth things over. I stopped myself. "I love you," I said. "But I won't sacrifice myself so you don't feel uncomfortable." She looked up at me, startled. "They said you'd understand," she whispered. "I do," I said. "I understand exactly how this works." She left, without another word.
That night, Laura emailed me a draft of the formal letter.
Seeing it in black and white was sobering. Demand for repayment. Timeline. Documentation. Notice of potential legal action.
This wasn't family language.
It was boundary language. I approved it. The letter went out certified mail the next morning. By afternoon, my father called. His voice was tight, controlled. "You're making a big mistake," he said.
"No," I replied. "I'm making a record."
"You're tearing this family apart," he said.
I paused. "You built it this way," I said.
I just stopped pretending.
He hung up.
That night, Mark asked me again if I was okay.
I thought about it.
"I don't feel safe," I said slowly. "But I feel clear."
He nodded.
I lay awake later, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything. The bakery, the declined card, the confidence with which my parents had acted. They hadn't seen this coming. They thought silence meant consent. What they didn't understand was that silence can also mean preparation. And I was done being quiet. My parents didn't respond to the letter right away. That, in itself, was an answer. 3 days passed, then 4. By the 5th day, my mother's silence felt intentional, like she was waiting for me to flinch first. I didn't. I went to work, I answered emails, I scheduled meetings. I lived my life as if the ground beneath me hadn't shifted, even though it had. On the 6th day, my father emailed, "Natalie, your mother and I are willing to meet and discuss this like a family. We don't appreciate involving lawyers. Let's handle this privately." No acknowledgement, no apology, no mention of the money, just control, wrapped in politeness. I forwarded the email to Laura. Her reply was immediate. "If you meet them, I want it documented. Public place. No raised voices. Take notes afterward." I agreed to meet, not because I thought it would fix anything, but because I wanted to see them clearly one last time, without the fog of hope. We met at a quiet cafe in Winnetka, the kind of place where people spoke softly, and everyone pretended not to listen. My parents were already seated when I arrived, sitting side by side like they were presenting a united front. My mother smiled when she saw me. It didn't reach her eyes. "You look thin," she said. "Are you sleeping?" "I'm fine," I replied, sitting across from them. My father folded his hands on the table. "This has gotten out of hand." "I agree," I said. "That's why we're here." My mother sighed dramatically. "We never meant to hurt you." I waited. "But," she continued, "you need to understand the pressure we're under. Emily is overwhelmed. The wedding costs spiraled. We had to act quickly." "You acted quickly," I said. "With my money." She winced. "That sounds so harsh." "It sounds accurate," I replied. My father leaned forward. "You're focusing on the wrong thing." I raised an eyebrow. "Which part is the wrong thing?" "The money," he said. "This is about family." "No," I said calmly. "This is about consent." My mother's jaw tightened. "You're being cold." "No," I said. "I'm being careful." There was a pause. The clink of a spoon against porcelain from a nearby table filled the space. "We raised you," my mother said finally. "We supported you. We sacrificed." "And I'm grateful," I said. "That doesn't give you the right to decide for me." My father shook his head. "You always were stubborn." I almost laughed. "I was compliant," I corrected. "You're just noticing the difference." My mother reached across the table, as if to take my hand. I pulled it back. "Why the lawyer?" she asked softly. "Why turn this into something ugly?" "Because," I said, "when I asked for answers, you gave me silence." She looked offended. "We needed time. You needed control," I said. Her eyes flashed. "You don't know what you're talking about." I took a breath. Then explained this. I slid a printed copy of my spreadsheet across the table. Dates, amounts, notes. My father's face drained of color as he scanned it. My mother didn't pick it up. "What is that?" she asked sharply. "A record," I said, "of every time money left my account without my explicit permission." "That's ridiculous," she said. "We always paid it back." "Except when you didn't," I replied. My father cleared his throat. "Those were loans." "Loans require agreement," I said. I never agreed. My mother scoffed. "You didn't object." "I wasn't informed," I said. "That's not consent." Her voice rose slightly. "So what? Now you're accusing us of stealing?" I didn't raise my voice. "I'm saying you assumed my silence meant yes," I said. And you were wrong. People at nearby tables glanced over. My father leaned back, his tone changing. Let's be practical. Emily can't return the money right now. I know, I said. That's why the letter includes a repayment plan. My mother laughed, sharp and humorless. You expect us to pay you back? Yes, I said. Over time. In writing. Her smile disappeared completely. You're choosing money over family, she said. I met her gaze. No, I said. You already did. That landed. My father rubbed his temples. This is not how we thought you'd handle this. I nodded. That's clear. There it was. They hadn't misjudged the situation. They'd misjudged me. We need time to think, my mother said, standing abruptly. I've already given you time, I replied. She leaned down, her voice low. If you push this, you'll regret it. I didn't flinch. I already regret trusting you, I said. They left without saying goodbye. I stayed seated for a few minutes after they were gone, my hands steady around my coffee cup. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't upset. I felt something close to relief. That evening, Laura called. How did it go? She asked. They confirmed everything without realizing it, I said. She hummed softly. That's often how it happens. What's next? I asked. They'll either comply, she said, or they'll escalate. And if they escalate? I asked. She paused. Then we see what else they've been hiding. 2 days later, I got an email from my parents' accountant. Subject: Financial clarification request. The message was brief, polite, official. He requested a call to clarify certain family financial arrangements. I forwarded it to Laura. Her response came back with a single sentence. This just got interesting. That night, Mark sat beside me on the couch, scrolling through listings for wedding vendors we'd put on hold. Do you still want this? He asked gently. I thought about the money, the silence, the certainty in my parents' voices. I want a marriage, I said, not a performance. He nodded. I didn't know yet how much this would cost me, but I was starting to understand what it would save. The call from my parents' accountant came the next morning. His name was Richard Hale. I'd met him exactly twice in my life, both times at my parents' dining table, both times when he spoke to me like I was a guest instead of a participant. He had always addressed my parents directly, even when discussing numbers that involved me. Natalie, he said warmly, as if we were old friends. I'm just trying to clear up a few things. I forwarded your email to my attorney, I replied. She'll be joining the call. There was a pause. Oh, he said. That won't be necessary. It will, I said. Another pause. Longer this time. Very well, he said. I'll reschedule. Laura joined the call later that afternoon. Richard's tone changed immediately when she introduced herself. More formal, more careful. We're conducting a routine internal review, he explained. Given the recent family disagreement, your parents thought it might be wise to make sure everything is properly documented. Laura smiled politely. I could hear it in her voice. That's an excellent idea, she said. Transparency is always helpful. He cleared his throat. I just need to understand the nature of certain transfers from Ms. Rowe's account. I leaned forward. I can help with that, I said. Those transfers were made without my consent. There it was. Silence. Richard finally spoke. Mrs. Rowe indicated she had standing authority. She did, Laura said. That authority is now under review. Richard hesitated. Under review how? Legally, Laura replied. The call ended shortly after that. Not hostile, not dramatic, but something had shifted. That evening, Emily called. I almost didn't answer, but I did. They're freaking out, she said without preamble. Mom hasn't slept. Dad keeps pacing. They didn't think you'd go this far. I closed my eyes. I didn't think they'd take my money, I said. She was quiet. They're saying you're trying to ruin the family, she said softly. No, I replied. I'm trying to stop being used. You could have just talked to us, she said. I did, I said. You just didn't listen, she sniffed. The venue won't refund anything. They're threatening penalties. That's not my responsibility, I said. But it affects me, she said. So did taking my money, I replied. She didn't argue. Instead, she said something that confirmed everything I'd been suspecting. They always said you'd be fine, she whispered, that you could handle it. There it was again. Strength, reframed as obligation. I'm not fine, I said. I'm just done pretending. After we hung up, I sat quietly for a long time. Then I did something I hadn't planned to do. I pulled out the old box my mother had given me years ago, labeled Important Documents. birth certificate, social security card, a few faded insurance forms. At the bottom was something I'd never looked at closely, a copy of my grandmother's will. I frowned. My grandmother, Eleanor Rowe, had died 5 years earlier. She'd been my father's mother. Stern, practical. The only person in my family who ever treated me like an adult before I earned the title. I remembered sitting beside her in the hospital, holding her hand while she told me to never let anyone speak for you. At the time, I thought she was just being poetic. I opened the document. Most of it was standard. The house, some savings, personal items. Then, I saw my name. A small bequest. A trust. I blinked. That wasn't right. I distinctly remembered my father telling me there was nothing set aside for me, that everything went to him and my mother, to simplify things. I turned the pages. The trust was modest, but real. Enough to matter. And it listed my parents as trustees. I felt my pulse quicken. I scanned the final page. Distribution conditions. To be transferred to Natalie Rowe upon her marriage or her 32nd birthday, whichever came first. My 32nd birthday was in 3 months. I sat back slowly. This wasn't about Emily's wedding. This wasn't just about control. This was about timing. They had taken my money right before something else became available, something they controlled. I called Laura immediately. I think there's more, I said. She listened as I explained. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. This changes the scope, she said finally. If they've been managing a trust in your name without disclosure, that's a serious issue. What do we do? I asked. We request a full accounting, she said, immediately. The email went out that night. Formal request. Legal language. Deadlines. By morning, my parents' silence had turned into something else entirely. My father showed up at my apartment, not knocking, pounding. I didn't open the door right away. Natalie, he called, his voice sharp. We need to talk. Now. I opened the door just enough to see his face. What? I asked. You had no right, he said. No right to dig into that. I had every right, I replied. It's my name on it. You're twisting things, he snapped. That trust was never meant for you directly. I raised an eyebrow. Then why is my name on it? He froze. Get a lawyer, I said. You're going to need one. His face hardened. You're making enemies you can't afford. I met his stare. I already know what it costs to be your ally, I said. I closed the door. That night, Mark sat beside me again. Quiet. You okay? He asked. I think, I said slowly. They were never planning to give me anything. He nodded. And I think, I continued, they're afraid I finally noticed. Outside, the city hummed, indifferent. Inside, something had snapped into focus. This wasn't a family disagreement anymore. This was a reckoning, and it had only just begun. The accounting documents arrived in a plain manila envelope 3 days later. No return address, just my name, typed neatly, like someone wanted it to feel official, without being traceable. Laura had warned me not to open it alone, but I did anyway, sitting at my dining table with the blinds half open and my phone within reach. Inside were photocopies, bank statements, investment summaries, annual reports. At the top of the first page was the title, Eleanor Rowe, Irrevocable Trust. My grandmother's trust. My hand stayed steady as I read, but something cold settled behind my ribs. The trust had been active since the year my grandmother died. It wasn't large enough to be flashy, but it wasn't insignificant either. A conservative investment portfolio. Low risk, steady growth. What stopped me wasn't the balance. It was the activity. Withdrawals, reallocations, loans. Some labeled family expenses, others simply disbursement. There were no records of distributions to me. None. I flipped to the trustee notes. Trustees, Harold Rowe and Diane Rowe. Discretionary authority exercised in alignment with family needs. Family needs. I felt a slow, controlled anger rise. Not hot, not explosive, but sharp enough to focus me. They hadn't forgotten the trust. They'd repurposed it. I called Laura immediately. She answered on the second ring. They sent documents, I said, and they're worse than I thought. Tell me, she said. I summarized quickly. The withdrawals, the lack of disclosure, the timing. When I finished, she exhaled slowly. Natalie, she said, this isn't mismanagement. This is concealment. What does that mean? I asked. It means, she said, They treated your trust like a private family fund. That's a breach of fiduciary duty. I closed my eyes. So what happens now? I asked. Now, she said, we request formal discovery, full records, and we petition the court to suspend their authority as trustees. My pulse quickened. They won't expect that, I said. No, she replied. They never expect the quiet one to escalate. That afternoon, Laura filed the petition. By evening, my parents knew. My mother left 6 voicemails. I didn't listen to them. My father sent a single text. You've crossed a line. I replied with one word. No. The next day at work, my manager pulled me aside. Is everything okay? She asked gently. Your parents called the office. I felt my stomach drop. They what? I asked. They said they were worried about you, she said. That you might be under stress. There it was. The narrative shift. They had no right to contact you, I said calmly. I didn't give them any information, she said quickly. But I wanted you to know. Thank you, I said. When I got home, Mark was already there. They called my mother, he said. I froze. What did they say? I asked. That you were spiraling, he said. That you were being manipulated by a lawyer. That the wedding might not be a good idea right now. I sank onto the couch. This is their move, I said quietly. Mark sat beside me. I told them to stop. I nodded. They're trying to isolate me. That night, Laura called again. They're claiming undue influence, she said. That you're emotionally distressed and not acting independently. I laughed once, short and humorless. Because I hired a lawyer, I said. Yes, she replied. It's a common tactic. What do we do? I asked. We document everything, she said. Every call, every message, every attempt to undermine you. I hung up and opened a new folder. Title, contact log, date, time, who, what was said. It filled quickly. By the end of the week, the court issued a temporary order. My parents were suspended as trustees pending review. All trust assets were frozen. No withdrawals, no transfers. I received the notice by email while sitting at my desk. I stared at it for a long moment before forwarding it to Laura. Then I forwarded it to my parents. No message, just the document. My phone rang immediately. I didn't answer. An hour later, Emily texted. What did you do? I typed back. I stopped them. She didn't reply. That night, Mark asked the question we'd both been avoiding. What does this mean for us? He asked. I took a breath. It means, I said slowly, I'm not getting married while my life is being managed by other people. He nodded, though I could see the disappointment flicker across his face. I don't want a wedding built on borrowed silence, I added. He reached for my hand. We'll do this the right way. When you're ready. I squeezed his hand. Outside, snow started to fall, soft and quiet. Inside, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Control. But I also knew this wasn't over. People who lose control don't go quietly. They escalate. And my parents had just lost more than access to money. They'd lost authority. The moment the trust freeze went into effect, the tone changed. It wasn't subtle. Up until then, my parents had operated with confidence. Even anger had come from a place of assumed authority. They spoke as if this was a misunderstanding I would eventually correct by backing down. The court order removed that certainty. Within 24 hours, the calls stopped. No voicemails, no texts, no emails. Silence this time wasn't punishment. It was recalculation. I recognized it immediately because I'd lived inside it my whole life. My parents had always believed silence was a tool, withholding warmth, withholding reassurance, waiting until discomfort did the work for them. But something had shifted. The silence felt careful. At work, the ripple effects became clearer. 2 days after the trust freeze, HR asked to meet with me. Not urgently, not formally, but the request itself made my stomach tighten. The HR director, Sandra, closed the door gently behind me and gestured for me to sit. I want to be very clear, she said before I could speak. This isn't disciplinary. This is informational. I nodded. Your parents contacted corporate leadership, she continued. They expressed concern about your mental state. There it was. What did they say? I asked calmly. That you're under extreme emotional distress, she said. That you may be making impulsive decisions. That your judgment could be compromised. I exhaled slowly. And your response? I asked. She met my eyes. We declined to engage. I felt a flicker of relief. We reviewed your performance, she continued. Your work speaks for itself. But I wanted you to know, because this crosses a boundary. Yes, I said. It does. If you want to file a formal notice preventing them from contacting the company again, we can support that, she added. I would, I said. After I left her office, I sat at my desk for a long moment, hands folded, heart steady. This wasn't about concern. This was about credibility. They weren't trying to talk to me anymore. They were trying to talk around me. That evening, Laura called. They've retained counsel, she said. I assumed they would, I replied. A different firm, she added. More aggressive. I almost smiled. Good, I said. That means they're afraid. She paused. They're alleging you've been manipulated, that you misunderstood the trust, that the funds were always intended for family use. Then they should have no problem explaining that under oath, I said. Laura hummed in agreement. They're requesting mediation, she said. Private. No court record. I laughed quietly. No, I said. That was my instinct as well, she replied. But I wanted to confirm. Why would I give them back control? I asked. You wouldn't, she said. I just needed to hear it from you. That night, Mark and I finally had the conversation neither of us could avoid any longer. Not about money. About timing. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I'd built spreadsheets and read legal documents and made decisions that had slowly rearranged my life. I support you, he said. I really do. But I need to know where I fit in this now. I nodded. I don't want to get married while I'm untangling myself from my family, I said. Not because I don't want you, but because I need to know who I am without them first. He was quiet for a moment, then he nodded. Okay, he said. Then we pause. Not cancel. Pause. That word mattered. We told people it was a scheduling issue, a work conflict, a timing thing. Most accepted it without question. My parents did not. The next move came through Emily. She showed up at my apartment again, eyes red, hands shaking slightly as she wrapped them around a mug of tea she didn't drink. They're scared, she said. I didn't respond. They didn't think you'd go this far, she continued. They thought you'd cool down. I'm not angry, I said. I'm finished. She looked at me like that scared her more. They're saying you're tearing everything apart, she whispered. I met her gaze. They already tore it apart, I said. They just didn't expect to be seen. She swallowed. They might lose the house, she said. That landed heavier than she expected it to. Not because I felt guilty, but because it confirmed what I already suspected. They had used the trust more than I knew. That's not my fault, I said quietly. They say you could stop this, she said. You could tell the court it was a misunderstanding. I shook my head. No, I said, because then nothing changes. She stood abruptly, chair scraping the floor. You always do this, she said. You always make things hard. I stayed seated. No, I said. I stopped making them easy. She left without another word. That night, I lay awake, thinking about my grandmother, about the way she used to watch my parents without comment, the way she'd squeeze my hand just a little tighter when my mother dismissed me or my father spoke over me. I finally understood what she'd been trying to tell me. Love that requires your silence is not love. It's management. The following week, the court scheduled a hearing, not a trial, not yet, but a formal review of trustee conduct. My parents would have to explain themselves in public record. Laura called me after the notice came through. This is the point where people usually panic, she said. I feel calm, I replied. That's because you've already grieved the version of them you needed to believe in, she said. She was right. I wasn't fighting my parents anymore. I was protecting myself. And for the first time, that felt like enough. The night before the hearing, my phone buzzed. A message from my mother. We never meant to hurt you. We did what we thought was best. Please don't do this. I stared at it for a long time. Then I set the phone face down. Because the truth was simple. They weren't afraid of hurting me. They were afraid of losing control. And tomorrow, they would have to answer for that. The courtroom didn't look the way people imagine it. There was no drama in the architecture. No sweeping columns or dark wood panels like you see in movies. Just beige walls, fluorescent lights, and a long table where people laid their lives out in manila folders. Still, the air felt heavy, not because of anger, because of exposure. My parents arrived 10 minutes late. That was intentional. My father had always believed arriving late was a power move. It forced people to wait. It reminded them who mattered. This time, no one reacted. The clerk didn't look up. The judge didn't pause. Laura didn't blink. They sat down quietly, confused by the absence of deference. I didn't look at them. I focused on the edge of the table, on the grain of the wood beneath my fingers, on keeping my breathing steady. The judge, a woman in her late 60s with steel-gray hair pulled back in a neat bun, adjusted her glasses and began without ceremony. "This hearing concerns the conduct of trustees Daniel and Ruth Calder," she said, voice even. "Specifically, the management of the Marlowe Family Trust." My father straightened in his chair. "We've reviewed the preliminary filings," the judge continued. "Today is not about final judgment. It's about clarity." She turned her gaze to my parents. "Explain," she said simply, "why trust funds were accessed without beneficiary consent." My father cleared his throat. "We've always had broad discretion," he said. "The trust was designed to support the family as a whole." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Support," she repeated. "Or control." A ripple moved through the room. My father hesitated. That hesitation mattered. Laura leaned forward. "Your Honor," she said, "may I submit Exhibit C?" The judge nodded. Laura placed a document on the table. "This is the original trust language," she said. "Specifically, the clause limiting discretionary access." She slid a highlighted copy toward the bench. The judge read silently. Then she looked back at my parents. "This clause is very clear," she said. "Discretion does not extend to unilateral liquidation without disclosure." My mother spoke for the first time. "We didn't hide anything," she said quickly. "We just didn't think it required permission." The judge's voice stayed calm. "Did you inform the beneficiary?" she asked. My mother opened her mouth, closed it. "No," she said finally. The judge nodded. "Then you hid it," she said. The words landed hard, not because they were loud, because they were precise. My father leaned forward. "This is being blown out of proportion," he said. "Our daughter has always been emotional. She misinterpreted." The judge cut him off with a raised hand. "Do not diagnose your adult child in my courtroom," she said sharply. "Address the financial facts." The room went very still. Laura didn't look at me, but I felt her quiet approval. She submitted the next exhibit. Bank statements, time-stamped transfers, property documents linked to accounts that had received trust funds. The judge studied them carefully. Then she turned back to my parents. "You withdrew funds allocated for a single beneficiary," she said, "and used them to secure personal assets." My father shook his head. "Family assets," he corrected. "No," the judge said. "Personal assets. A second home. Renovations. Investments solely under your control." My mother's hands began to shake. "We thought we were helping," she said. "We thought we were protecting the family." The judge looked at her. "From what?" she asked. Silence. Then the judge turned to me for the first time. "Miss Calder," she said, "have you been informed of any emergency necessitating these withdrawals?" "No," I said quietly. "Were you asked?" "No." "Were you consulted in any way?" "No." She nodded. "That will be all," she said. She turned back to my parents. "This court is placing an immediate suspension on your roles as trustees," she said. "An independent fiduciary will be appointed pending full review." My mother gasped. My father went pale. "This is temporary," the judge continued. "But understand this. Trust law is built on duty, not entitlement, not family hierarchy." She paused. "And certainly not coercion." The gavel came down, not loudly, decisively. Outside the courtroom, the hallway felt brighter, as if someone had opened a window. Laura touched my arm. "You did well," she said. I nodded. "I didn't do anything," I replied. "You held," she said. "That's harder." My parents approached us near the elevators. My father's face had changed. Not angry, not confident, small. "You didn't have to do this," he said. I looked at him. "Yes," I said. "I did." My mother stepped forward, eyes wet. "We're your parents," she said. "We deserve a conversation." I shook my head. "You had decades," I said. This was the result. The elevator doors opened. They hesitated, unsure whether to step in with us. They didn't. As the doors closed, I saw something I'd never seen before. Fear. Not of losing money, but of losing the story they'd told themselves about who they were. That afternoon, Laura called me. "The independent trustee is efficient," she said. "They're already audited." "Good," I replied. "They'll uncover everything," she added. "Be prepared." "I am," I said. That night, Mark brought takeout and sat with me on the couch.
You look different, he said.
Lighter, I replied. You didn't raise your voice once, he said. I didn't need to, I said. Later, alone, I opened my journal. I wrote one sentence. They called it love because it sounded better than ownership. The hearing wasn't the end. It was the shift. The moment power changed hands. Without shouting, without pleading, without explanation. And for the first time, I understood something clearly. Justice doesn't roar. It rearranges the furniture quietly until the people who thought they owned the room realized they're standing in the hallway. The audit began quietly. No phone calls, no confrontations, no dramatic announcements, just letters. Certified mail envelopes addressed to my parents, to the bank, to the property management company in Vermont, to a small investment firm I had never heard of, but recognized immediately once I saw the address. The independent trustee, a woman named Helen Shore, did not reach out to me emotionally. She reached out precisely. Her first email was 4 lines long. Ms. Calder, we have initiated a full forensic review of trust activity for the past 7 years. You will receive periodic updates. Please do not contact your former trustees directly during this process. That was it. No reassurance, no sympathy, no narrative, just process. I slept better that night than I had in months. The first update came a week later. Helen called instead of emailing. There are discrepancies, she said. I didn't ask what kind. I waited. Funds were moved through intermediary accounts, she continued. Some transactions were masked as internal rebalancing. I closed my eyes. How much? I asked. She paused. More than you were aware of, she said carefully. That was the moment something inside me hardened, not into anger, into clarity. I had assumed the trust violation was a single decision made in panic or entitlement. It wasn't. It was a pattern. Over the next 2 weeks, the picture filled in. Small withdrawals at first, always timed around holidays, always justified as temporary. Always returned just before annual reporting deadlines. Then, larger ones. Used as collateral. Used to secure lines of credit. Used to keep appearances intact. My parents hadn't stolen once. They had borrowed indefinitely. And they had done it because they believed I would never look closely. Helen sent over a preliminary summary. I read it slowly, sitting at my kitchen table, a cup of coffee growing cold beside me. There it was, a paper trail of quiet confidence. My father had signed documents describing himself as acting beneficiary representative. My mother had notarized statements asserting implied consent. Neither was true, but both sounded official enough to slide past casual oversight. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I felt something colder. Validation. This wasn't about misunderstanding. This was about assumption. They assumed silence meant agreement. They assumed compliance meant permission. They assumed love meant access. Mark noticed the change before I did. You're not tense anymore, he said one night. I'm not guessing, I replied. That was the difference. For the first time, I wasn't imagining motives or second-guessing memories. I was reading facts. The next move came from their attorney. A formal request for settlement discussions. The language was conciliatory. Polite, almost warm, in the interest of family unity. To avoid unnecessary escalation. Willing to acknowledge procedural missteps. I forwarded it to Laura without comment. She called me within 10 minutes. They're trying to cap exposure, she said. They know what the audit is finding. Do we respond? I asked. Yes, she said, briefly. Her reply was a single sentence. My client will consider settlement discussions after the audit is complete. No threats, no counteroffers, no emotion. That silence was louder than anything I could have said. My mother broke first. She sent a letter, handwritten. I recognized her handwriting immediately. Rounded letters, careful spacing. The kind she used when she wanted to appear sincere. I didn't open it right away. I let it sit on the counter for 2 days. When I finally did, I read it once. Then I folded it and placed it back in the envelope. She wrote about sacrifice. About intention, about how much they'd given up for me. She wrote that she didn't understand when I became so distant. She wrote that money had changed me. I didn't respond, because responding would mean debating the premise. And I was done explaining myself to people who only listened when it benefited them. The audit's second phase uncovered something unexpected.
A life insurance policy taken out in my name, with my parents listed as contingent beneficiaries.
Funded partially through trust-derived funds. Helen called me herself. This was not disclosed, she said.
No, I replied. It wouldn't have been.
It indicates long-term planning, she continued, not just reactive misuse.
I felt a chill.
They hadn't just assumed control over my money. They had planned around my absence, my death.
Not actively, not maliciously,
but structurally. I thanked Helen and ended the call. That night, I sat alone in the living room with the lights off. I thought about every conversation where my parents talked about security, about legacy, about family continuity. I realized they had never meant me. They had meant the structure I represented. I was a column in their financial architecture. Useful, stable, replaceable. The next morning, Laura called.
"We have enough," she said.
"For what?" I asked.
"For removal permanently," she replied. "And restitution."
I exhaled slowly.
"What happens now?"
"They'll be offered terms," she said. "Return of misused funds, legal accountability, loss of trustee privileges, court oversight. And if they refuse, they won't," she said. "They can't afford to." That afternoon, I received a message from Emily. Just one line. "Dad isn't sleeping. Mom keeps crying. They don't understand why you're doing this." I stared at the screen. Then I typed, "I'm not doing this to them. I'm doing it without them." She didn't reply. The settlement conference was scheduled for the following week. I wasn't required to attend, but I chose to, not to speak, to observe. Because I wanted to see them when the numbers were no longer abstract, when their assumptions had names, when their control had consequences. As I closed my laptop that night, I realized something else. I wasn't waiting for justice anymore. Justice was already moving. What remained was reckoning, and I would be there when it arrived. The settlement conference took place in a narrow building downtown that used to be a law office, and now felt more like a holding room for decisions people didn't want to make. No courtroom, no audience, no ceremony. Just a long table, bad coffee, and a clock that ticked louder than it should have. I arrived early, not out of anxiety, out of choice. Laura was already there, reviewing documents with quiet focus. She looked up when I entered and gave a small nod. Not encouragement, confirmation. "You don't have to say anything," she reminded me. "I know," I said. That mattered. My parents arrived together this time. No late entrance, no performance. My father looked older, not frail, but diminished, as if someone had turned the volume down on him. My mother clutched her purse tightly, fingers white at the seams. They didn't look at me at first. Their attorney did. He was polished, mid-50s, calm in the way people are when they're paid to remain detached from emotional wreckage. "Thank you for coming," he said to the room. No one replied. The mediator, a retired judge with a neutral face and an efficient voice, opened the session. "This is not a trial," he said. "This is a resolution discussion. Facts have already been established through independent audit." He slid a folder to the center of the table. "The numbers speak clearly," he continued. "What remains is agreement on remedy." That was the moment I saw my father's jaw tighten. Not in anger, in recognition, because stories were his strength. Numbers were not. The mediator went through the findings calmly. Unauthorized withdrawals, misrepresentation of consent, use of trust assets for personal leverage, failure to disclose insurance instruments, breach of fiduciary duty. Each item landed without commentary. No adjectives, no accusations, just facts. When the mediator finished, he looked at my parents. "Do you dispute these findings?" he asked. My father opened his mouth, closed it. "No," he said quietly. That single word did something powerful. It collapsed every narrative they had built. The attorney cleared his throat. "My clients acknowledge procedural errors," he said, "but we believe intent matters." The mediator didn't react. "Intent matters at sentencing," he said. "This is not that." He turned to Laura. "What does your client seek?" Laura didn't look at me. She didn't need to. "Full restitution of misused funds," she said. "Permanent removal of trustee authority. Legal fees covered. Court oversight for future asset administration." The attorney nodded slowly. "That is extensive," he said. "It's accurate.
Laura replied. The mediator turned back to my parents. Can you comply? My mother spoke first. We raised her, she said suddenly. We gave her everything. The mediator raised a hand. That is not responsive, he said. She pressed on anyway. We never thought she'd treat us like criminals, she said, voice cracking. That was the first time I spoke. I didn't treat you like criminals, I said calmly. I treated you like adults. The room went quiet. My father finally looked at me. Really looked. For the first time since the hearing, his expression wasn't strategic. It was confused. When did you become like this? He asked. I didn't answer right away. Then I said, when I stopped needing you to agree with me. The mediator cleared his throat. Let's stay focused, he said. The attorney whispered to my parents. They listened. Then my father nodded. We'll agree, he said, just like that. No speech, no apology, no resistance. Because at this point, resistance would cost more. The agreement took an hour to finalize. Signatures were added. Clauses initialed. Conditions accepted. When it was done, the mediator stood. This matter will proceed to court confirmation, he said. Assuming compliance, this concludes the dispute. My parents gathered their things slowly. My mother hesitated. Then she turned toward me. You didn't have to humiliate us, she said. I met her eyes. I didn't, I said. You did that yourselves. I just stopped covering for it. She looked like she wanted to argue. Then she didn't. They left without another word. Laura packed her bag. You okay? She asked. Yes, I said, and I meant it. Outside, the sun felt brighter than it should have. Not because something dramatic had happened, but because something had ended. Mark met me for lunch afterward. You look steady, he said. I am, I replied. Do you feel relieved? I thought about it. Relief feels temporary, I said. This feels final. That night, alone at home, I opened my email. There was a message from Helen Shore. Trust transition complete. Assets secured. New administrator appointed. No flourish, just closure. I poured myself a glass of water and sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I once tried to calculate how to make everyone happy. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clear. I understood now that the hardest part wasn't taking action. It was letting go of the fantasy that compliance would ever earn safety. My parents didn't lose because I fought them. They lost because they depended on my silence, and silence was no longer available. The weeks after the settlement were quieter than I expected. Not peaceful, not warm, just empty. The kind of emptiness that follows a long illness. When the noise of treatment stops, and you're left listening to your own body again, unsure which sensations are normal and which are echoes. My parents didn't call, they didn't write. They didn't try to negotiate their way back into my life. At first, I wondered if they were regrouping, waiting for another angle. But slowly, I understood something harder. They didn't know how to exist without leverage, without authority, without access, without a role where they could steer the outcome. They had nothing to say. Silence had been their weapon. Now, it was their confusion. Emily stopped texting. Not dramatically, not angrily, she just faded. I heard through a cousin that she was keeping her head down, trying not to get pulled into the fallout, that she was tired of being asked to take sides. I understood. I had spent years doing the same thing. At work, things shifted in subtle ways. People didn't ask questions. No one brought up the court case, or my parents, or the trust. But something changed in how they looked at me. Not fear, respect. Not because I had won, but because I had acted decisively, without spectacle. Sandra from HR stopped by my desk one afternoon. I just wanted to say, she said, lowering her voice, you handled a difficult situation with integrity. Thank you, I replied. And if you ever want leadership training, she added, we'd be glad to support that. It wasn't an offer I'd expected, but it made sense. People trust those who can hold boundaries without drama. Mark and I started talking again. Not about weddings, about life, about how much of myself I had muted without realizing it. You don't second-guess yourself anymore, he said one night as we walked through the neighborhood. I still do, I replied. I just don't outsource it. That earned a smile. I didn't rush to rebuild family traditions. I didn't host holidays or try to fill the gap. For the first time, I let the absence exist. And in that space, other things grew. I reconnected with friends I'd slowly distanced myself from over the years. Friends who didn't need me to play a role. I started therapy again. Not to fix anything,
to understand it, to name what had happened without minimizing it. Control disguised as care, expectation disguised as love, access disguised as family. The therapist didn't tell me to forgive. She didn't tell me to reconcile. She asked one question that stuck with me. What did staying cost you? The answer took time. It cost me clarity. It cost me confidence. It cost me the ability to trust my own judgment. But most of all, it cost me choice. Because when someone controls your resources, they don't need to control your actions. They just wait. The independent trustee sent a final report at the end of the quarter. Everything was clean now, documented, transparent, protected. The trust wasn't just restored, it was redefined. No family access, no discretionary loopholes, no ambiguity. I had insisted on that. Laura had warned me it might feel cold. It didn't. It felt sane. On a Sunday afternoon in early fall, I visited my grandmother's grave. I hadn't gone in years. I stood there quietly, hands in my coat pockets, leaves crunching beneath my feet. I finally did it, I said softly. I didn't know what I meant exactly. Stopped enabling, stopped absorbing, stopped disappearing. I imagined her nodding the way she used to. Slow, knowing. The following week, I received a letter from my father. Short, typed, no handwriting. It said, I hope one day you understand why we did what we did. I regret how it turned out. No apology, no ownership. Just regret for the outcome. I folded it and placed it in a drawer. Not to reread, to remember. Some people never change. They just lose their audience. As winter approached, I realized something else. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger had done its job. It had carried me through action. What remained was acceptance. Not forgiveness. Acceptance. They were who they were, and I no longer needed them to be different. The last piece fell into place on a quiet Tuesday evening. Mark and I were making dinner together when he said, casually, I think we should start planning again. Slowly. When you're ready. I smiled. I am, I said. Not because everything was perfect, but because I wasn't building a future on compromise anymore. I was building it on consent. The first Christmas after everything happened arrived without warning. No group texts, no forced cheer, no obligation disguised as tradition. Just a quiet morning, pale winter light slipping through the curtains, and the unfamiliar feeling of peace. I woke up early out of habit. For years, holidays meant vigilance, managing moods, anticipating conflict, making sure nothing went wrong. This time, there was nothing to manage. Mark was still asleep. The house was quiet except for the hum of the heater and the sound of my own breathing. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I'd once planned my life around other people's expectations. I didn't miss them. That surprised me, not because I lacked sentiment, but because I finally understood what I'd been confusing for love. What I missed, for years, wasn't my parents. It was the version of myself I'd never been allowed to become. Over the next few weeks, the story settled into its final shape. The court confirmed the settlement. The trust restructuring became permanent. The restitution payments began quietly, automatically, without conversation. My parents complied. Not out of remorse, out of necessity. We did not speak. Emily sent a message in January. I hope you're okay. I stared at it for a long time. Then I replied, I am. Nothing more. Nothing less. Some people need distance to learn respect. Others never learn at all. And that's not something you can fix. Mark and I set a new date, not announced, not performative, just chosen. We told friends individually, people who asked how I was, not what happened, people who didn't need an explanation. At work, I accepted a promotion I hadn't realized I'd been avoiding. Leadership, it turned out, wasn't about confidence. It was about clarity, about knowing where your responsibility ended. About not rescuing people from the consequences of their own choices. One afternoon, Laura called. Your file is officially closed, she said. I thanked her. Then she added, for what it's worth, this is one of the cleanest boundary cases I've seen. It didn't feel clean, I said. No, she agreed, but it was honest. That mattered more than I expected. In therapy, I talked about the guilt that still surfaced occasionally, the reflex to check in. the urge to explain myself, the instinct to soften the truth. It faded slowly, not because I worked harder, but because I stopped reopening the wound. The final lesson came quietly, in a moment that didn't look important at all. I ran into my mother at the grocery store. It was accidental. I turned the corner near the produce section, and there she was, examining apples, shoulders tense, posture unfamiliar without the armor of authority. She saw me at the same time. We froze. She opened her mouth, then closed it. For a second, I saw the woman underneath everything. The one who had been afraid. The one who had confused control with safety. Then she straightened, nodded once, and walked away. I didn't follow. I didn't call out. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt finished. That was the moment I knew the story was over. Not because justice had been served, not because karma had arrived dramatically, but because I no longer needed an ending. I had already moved on. I used to believe that being a good daughter meant being available, being agreeable, being flexible, being small enough to fit inside someone else's comfort. I know better now. Being an adult means choosing yourself, even when it disappoints the people who benefit from your silence. Especially then. Boundaries are not punishment. They are information. They tell people what kind of relationship is possible. And if someone walks away when you draw a line, they were never walking beside you to begin with. I didn't win because I fought my family. I won because I stopped fighting myself. If you're listening to this and recognizing pieces of your own life in it, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not cruel for choosing dignity. You are not selfish for protecting what's yours. You are not obligated to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't confrontation. It's clarity. It's paperwork. It's silence. It's walking away with your name intact and your future untouched. The tables didn't turn because I pushed them. They turned because I stepped back and let the truth stand on its own. And that was enough. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Where are you listening from? What moment stood out to you the most? Please consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and sharing it with someone who might need the reminder that choosing yourself is not betrayal. It's survival.